guys, Mapletail here. Last week was my usual voiceoverless channel rewind of 2024, but today I wanted to talk a bit about the past year too. And we're drawing a piece for my year-end art summary to fill the December slot using some of ArtFight's Arctic Fight prompts. I meant to have this video out last month, and it was drawn in December, so it counts. And since this is a long one, we're also drawing a little Wild Frost fan art for next week's video. Shh. Let's get into it. There's three main things I want to get into today. My art summary, my Spotify Wrapped, and my Steam year in review. I love all these year-end wrap-ups and stats and thought it'd be fun to talk about them here and document them. Let's start with my art summary. I've made one of these for every year since I started posting my art in 2018. I generally split my favorite pieces of the year between this and my art versus artist collage that I post in December. For that one, I included the 3 zines I joined this year, as well as the one I made on my own, and a few of my favorite Baldur's Gate 3 and Wild Frost drawings that didn't fit on my summary. Speaking of the summary, Baldur's Gate and Wild Frost were and still are huge video game hyperfixations of mine, and it definitely showed here. For January, I chose this drawing of Fliss and Alabaster from Cattail's Wildwood Story that I drew for a sticker design. I just think it's super sweet, and definitely my favorite drawing of the month. And I wanted to make sure to include a little cattails on here somewhere, as I spent so much time playing it this year. Still gotta get back to that. February's drawing had to be the piece where I designed my main Wild Frost OC, Starloom. I adore her design and this concept type art for her. A no-brainer for me. March labeled Sprout Fight, as I like to swap out the month names for any monthly art challenge that I participated in that month. And this absolutely had to feature the first drawing of my Baldur's Gate OC, December, with the character Astarion from the game. I love this piece, and it started my obsession with drawing my little guy. We'll be seeing a lot more of them as we go through. April was back to Wild Frost and Starloom. I accidentally posted this piece on Wild Frost's first year anniversary, which was wild. It's the back cover of the zine I made, Starloom's Journal, and it matches the cover on my Art vs. Artist. It's my favorite April piece, and possibly my favorite thing I drew this year. May, or Mermay, almost featured the actual mermaid drawing I did, but I ended up choosing this piece that I drew to commemorate finishing my first Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough. June, or Pride Month, similarly does not feature the Pride Month art I did, as I preferred this drawing I did where I designed my second Wild Frost OC, Lula, who is bi, so still counts. My love for this game has also given me a renewed appreciation for drawing backgrounds, as the game's landscapes and use of color are gorgeous and so fun to draw. July, or Art Fight, we finally get some Warrior Cats fan art of Blue Star, a panel redraw from the Prophecies Begin graphic novel. Another beautiful and inspiring piece of media. While that month was Art Fight, I don't post any of my Art Fight art until the event is over, so there were very few pieces to choose from, even though I drew over 100 drawings that month. But I felt like this piece fit in great. I also go by when I post an art piece instead of actually drew it, as it's much easier to keep track of with Tumblr's handy post archive. For August, I had plenty of Art Fight drawings to choose from, but didn't really want to use art of someone else's OC and having to go ask, etc. So we have another drawing of December, from a little comic I drew of them as though they were a companion character in the game. I did include one of my Art Fight pieces in Art vs. Artist, as it features my brother's OC, and I figured he wouldn't mind. September/Cattember actually does feature a Cattember drawing. I loved the series of D&D kitties I drew for the challenge this year, and picked my favorite, Wizard of the Sun, Nyx. Nyx is still one of my favorite OCs, so I had to get her on here at least once anyways. Still have to get around to printing this set of drawings as stickers. A goal for next year. October, or Art Fright, is another Nyx drawing, but their Baldur's Gate design is a tiefling sorcerer. Playing this character alongside my squad in our co-op playthrough has been a highlight of my year, so I had to include that somewhere. November/Tavember had to feature one of my Baldur's Gate 3 drawings. My favorite sketch from the challenge was of December and Astarion in the Underdark. Another background I really liked drawing this year. It's simple, but I love this piece. And that brings us to December, or Arctic Fight. Funnily enough, I didn't draw my character December for it. No. Today's drawing uses the art prompts Snowflake, Quilt, and Celebration, and features one of my favorite original story OCs, Essen, and their guardians over the years, celebrating the holidays. I've always wanted to draw a couple of these scenes, and this felt like a perfect opportunity. I got more into my art and videos of the year in my rewind, so let's move on to the next section. If I had to choose my 3 favorite interests, art and video games are pretty obvious looking at my channel. But I speak about the third very rarely here, music. So let's have a look at my favorite artists, albums, and songs of the year. My Spotify Wrapped says I listened to over 78,000 minutes this year, which does not surprise me with how constantly I have my headphones in. Before the Wrapped came out, I made some predictions for what I listened to most. I guessed my top 5 artists would be The Crane Wives, Sarah Kinsley, Metric, Mr. Wives, and Yabadum. With honorable mentions, Paris Paloma, Amelie Farron, Standards, Baby Bugs, Fish in a Birdcage, Madeline May, Dom Farah, Aurora, The Oh Hellos, and Lord Huron. Well, I guessed my top 5 songs would be Arcturus Beaming by The Crane Wives, Realms by Sarah Kinsley, Unsweetened Lemonade by Amelie Farron, Good Luck Babe by Chapel Roan, Too Sweet by Hosier, with honorable mentions, Boys, Bugs, and Men by Paris Paloma, All Comes Crashing by Metric, Baby Baby by Baby Bugs and Sola, Following the Sun by Super High and Nika, Black Friday by Tom Odell, Mountain Man by Yabadum, Never the Muse by Madeline May, Summer Between the Sand and the Stardust by Hayley Kiyoko, Coconut by Standards, 7-2 by Mr. Wives. A lot of these songs were standalone favorites or the favorites of my top albums. And let me tell you, I was not that far off. My actual top 5 artists out of the 978 I listened to were The Crane Wives, Mr. Wives, Metric, Sarah Kinsley, and Paris Paloma. And my actual top 5 songs out of the 2,401 I listened to were Arcturus Beaming, Somewhere Between the Sand and the Stardust, Realms, Mountain Man, and Unsweetened Lemonade. With all my incorrect guesses being pretty high in my Wrapped Top 100 playlist. But I definitely underestimated how many times I listened to Somewhere Between the Sand and the Stardust and Mountain Man. I am one to listen to music on repeat heavily, if I love a song or artist. So I knew with absolute certainty my top 1 of each, as I listened to Arcturus Beaming and The Crane Wives as a whole so many times this year. I mean, I streamed that one song like 322 times, and it came out in June. I've always been a fan of The Crane Wives, but their new album, Beyond, 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 took things to a whole new level for me. Speaking of albums, it's something Spotify Wrapped unfortunately doesn't track, so I've made a list of my own. Let's do this chronologically. Careful Kid by Yabadum was entirely my siblings' fault, and I listened to that album aggressively on repeat at the start of the year. I was not that surprised that Mountain Man from this album ended up in my top 5, as outside of just listening to the album as a whole bunch, this specific song is also in several of my favorite playlists that I made this year. Formentera by Metric was more my partner's fault. All Comes Crashing and a few others from the album barely didn't make it into my top 5, largely in part by them being featured in my main Baldur's Gate and Wild Frost playlists that were definitely my most listened to of the year. Another thing that I wish Spotify Wrapped tracked. Not an album, but an EP worth mentioning is Soulless Valley by Renairy. They were one of my top artists last year, so I was incredibly excited when their first EP of original songs dropped this year. Something a little bit different was Fruit Town by Standards. I typically veer away from all instrumental music nowadays, but Fruit Town just hit different. Fruit Island and Fruit Galaxy have some great bops as well, but Fruit Town has my favorites, and the best name. Super Bloom by Mr. Wives is neither a new album nor new to just me, but it was one of the albums of theirs that I had largely glossed over. I've always liked Mr. Wives, but when their amazing album Nosebleeds released last year, I started listening to them a lot more actively, and for some reason just never paid Super Bloom much notice. That changed this year. I gave it a go when looking for songs for my playlists, and oh my god, it's just bop after bop. 7-2 was my most played song from the album, but I'd be hard pressed to pick a favorite. Next is a selection of albums I tend to listen to back to back, with a bit of a darker vibe. Melodramatic by Siamese, which I started listening to due to them having a cat on the cover. Kissing Death by Mothica, which fit well with the playlists I was working on at the time. Hayfields by Yelokre, and In My Bones by Baby Bugs. Again, the fault of my sibling. Another set of albums that go together for me, this time with themes of escapism to some extent, are The Bard by Madeline May, which really fed into my Baldur's Gate and D&D interest this year. I love all of her music, but this EP really brought me back to listening to her stuff. Only a few songs, but so good. Beyond 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 by the Crane Wives, which was easily my most anticipated and listened to album of the year. I usually don't look forward to albums aside from anything Marina makes, so waiting for this album to drop was a bit of a new experience for me, and oh my god, was it ever worth it. I love the Crane Wives, but the songs on this album went above and beyond for me. Beyond. I wish I had the amount of times I streamed all the songs on this album, but I assume most of them are in the hundreds. So yeah, big fan of this one. I even filled out a tier list for this album. Arcturus Beaming, Scars, Higher Ground, Mad Dog, and Black Hole Fantasy being my top 5 favorites. While waiting for this album, I saw that another of my favorite artists, Sarah Kinsley, was releasing her album Escaper the same day. It was an amazing day for music, let me tell you. Again, I wasn't really one to get too hyped about an upcoming album, but after hearing the song Realms when it released early, oh my god, breathtaking. I have extreme difficulty learning the lyrics to songs, but this one was so good I just had to put the effort in to memorize it. And the whole album is great too. Matter and Last Time We Never Meet Again being real high points. Paris Paloma was someone I wasn't quite sure would crack my top 5, due to me starting to listen to her properly with her new album Cacophony very late this year. But clearly I listened on repeat just enough. And for good reason. After hearing the song Huntress by Chance, I fell in love. And upon listening to the rest of the album, and realizing it wasn't even the best song there, blown away. Boys, Bugs, and Men and Knitting Song being the other two big standouts. The final album of this set that I didn't find until November, so it didn't have a chance of making it onto my Wrapped, but I loved it enough to mention it here, was Baby, I'm the Wolf by Have. I read the titles and saw a wolf song, vampire song, and a moon song, things I'm always looking for. I knew I was in for a good time, and oh boy, was I right. Honorable mentions go to the EP 1 October by Dom Farah that I was obsessed with in December of last year, so it didn't show up much in my Wrapped, and The Secret of Us by Gracie Abrams, which I've been listening to this December, so likely won't show up much on next year's. I'll leave a link to my top 100 playlist if anyone wants to check that out, as that works this year. Okay, that's quite enough music. Let's talk Steam Year in Review, or Steam Replay as they're back to calling it. After the suspenseful wait for Spotify Wrapped, I began to wait for Steam's. Like I didn't already know what my most played video games were this year. I've already mentioned a couple of them in this video. Let's start off with my predictions. There were exactly 5 games that I was sure I'd played over 50 hours of this year, so it wasn't too difficult to predict. Without a shadow of a doubt, Baldur's Gate 3 is my top game of 2024. At the time of writing this, I've played a little over 350 hours of it across 4 playthroughs since I got the game in the spring. I still love video games, and I play them often, but it's nothing compared to the hours I used to spend on them when I was younger. My love for Baldur's Gate changed that, as I foresee it becoming one of my most played games of all time, eventually. As for the rest of my top 5, the other games that I definitely played 50 plus hours of this year are Wild Frost, my beloved, Cattail's Wildwood Story, Balatro, and Palworld. I've made videos on all of these outside of Balatro, so that checks out. Let's take a look at the actual stats. I only played 14 games this year on Steam, very likely because I spent all my time on my top game. Achievements and new games were also down from last year, at 176 and 9 respectively. But gaming sessions went way up to 427. Percentage-wise, my top 5 games were Balatro at 4% of my overall Steam playtime. A surprise for me was Stardew Valley, also at 4%. Wild Frost lower than I expected, at 5%. Palworld at 9%, leaving a whopping 65% for Baldur's Gate 3. Yeah, about what I figured. Considering my top games, my top genres were a little bit surprising, considering none of them seem to relate to Baldur's Gate. Maybe it's more just by how many games I played per genre than overall playtime? Not sure. But they are as follows. Number 6, fishing. I blame that entirely on web fishing. Okay, and a little on Stardew Valley. Number 5, cats. I love that this is a genre. Number 4, creature collectors. Definitely played a few of those with Palworld and Cassette Beasts from off the top of my head. 3, roguelike deck builders. Thank you Wild Frost, Balatro, and Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers for turning me onto a genre I thought I had no interest in. Number 2, farming sim. Classic. And number 1, card battler. The same thing as number 3 in my case. For individual game stats, I played Baldur's Gate 3 the most in March when I bought it, and played every month after, barring July, which makes sense with how busy my Julys typically are. Palworld was almost entirely played in February. Wild Frost I played all but 3 months, like Baldur's Gate. Here skipping the spring and September, and peaking in June. Stardew I played the most in May, and a bit the rest of the spring and summer. Well, Balatro was an April thing, with a bit in the following months and in the fall. As for the other games I played in 2024, Cassette Beasts was at 4%, Cattail's Wildwood Story at 3%, Web Fishing and Bokura at 2%, and Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers, Card Shark, The Big Con, Manabo, and Sticky Business all at less than 1%. Like I said, I have played so much Baldur's Gate 3 already, and have plans for much more, especially with an update on the horizon, adding crossplay and new subclasses. Half the fun of playing it for me is creating characters and planning out all their classes and backstories, etc. I doubt I'll actually get through all my planned playthroughs, but I'd at least like to get through the first 8, one of which is finished, 2 are in the final act of the game, and a 4th is at least started. A couple of them are multiplayer too, which goes much faster in terms of hours, and that helps. I've also recently gotten back into playing Wild Frost, as a mutual of mine, Mega Marine, drew 2 of my OCs and added them into their Wild Frost mod, Sleet Storm, which is one of the coolest things that has ever happened to me. The mod is really well done, and is still being updated, adding tons of new and interesting cards and charms, etc. into the game, while still feeling very Wild Frost. Would recommend checking it out if you play. I'll leave a link in the description too, and I'll be talking a little more about it next week. I am surprised that Cattails didn't make it on there like I thought it would, with all my playing it here on the channel and trying to see all there is to see. I guess that was a little more 2023 than I remembered. I've played it across all available stages of development and seen it grown into such an amazing game. Unfortunately, I had to pause my Let's Play of it when I moved over the summer, and have been having a hard time going back to it, but I hope to this year. That probably contributed to it falling out of my top 5, sadly. As for Balatro, I got it as it's the same genre as Wild Frost, and I've been wanting to explore that more. I never thought it was a genre for me before, but I was oh so wrong, and I'd love to play more roguelike deck builders similar to those two. With Palworld, I was mostly interested in the multiplayer bit, which is so fun. I've been looking for more creature collector games that function a little bit better than Pokemon does right now. As for Stardew Valley, I was shocked it made the cut this year. I only play it with my friends, and I didn't think we'd quite played it enough this year with us switching to Baldur's Gate, but apparently we did. Probably from our Baldur's Gate 3 inspired playthrough. It was also harder to tell the hours on that one as I've been playing it for years. Before leaving off today, I also want to have a quick peek at my Nintendo Switch year in review. I always forget about this one, but I played 12 games on the Switch in 2024, and for 109 hours. My top 3 games were Pokemon Violet at 50 hours, Pokemon Legends Arceus at 42 hours, and Wild Frost for another 8. I talked about my Pokemon Shiny hunting adventures back in February, so that's what we're seeing here. My top genres were role-playing at 59%, action at 21%, card game at 5%, adventure at 4%, and character-driven at 1%. I played the most in January, with a major drop-off after that. I'd gotten Pokemon Violet for Christmas and did almost all my Pokemon in that time, so that makes a lot of sense. As well as starting to play Wild Frost much more on PC to check out the beta for a previous update. By month, Violet was my top game of January, Cult of the Lamb in February, Wild Frost in April, Miitopia in July, Tears of the Kingdom in August, when I finally finished the game, and Legends Arceus in October for a little more shiny hunting. Of all those games, Wild Frost was definitely my favorite. The game just has such a special place in my heart. As for Pokemon, I'm pretty cynical on it after the poor performance of Violet. Despite still enjoying my time playing it, it's not a game I'd ever go back to when I can play Legends Arceus instead. That said, I'm currently optimistic about the upcoming Pokemon Legends ZA, and I hope that they will take their time in making sure it runs properly at the very least. I'll put up with a lot, but bad lag frustrates me to no end. It being another Legends game and one based on my first Pokemon game, that will almost definitely feature my favorite Pokemon Absol after so long without them, is something I'm definitely personally very excited about. But anyways, I think I will leave it there. Thanks for watching! This past year has been great for my art making, music listening, and video gaming. I look forward to what the next will bring. If you've got a Spotify Wrapped, Steam Replay, or Nintendo Switch year in review, or anything similar, feel free to share your top songs or games of the year. I'm always on the lookout for new media. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next Thursday.